You're listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast with Matt Tomasi and can be found at borntokickarse.com/episode 42.
Welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast, where you're introduced to the most fascinating people on the planet. Learn the ingredients of greatness that you can apply to your life. And now your host, Matthew Tomasi.
Greg McDermott used to be overweight, overworked, and did virtually no exercise. In this episode, Greg talks about a moment at a friend's wedding that caused him to radically change the direction of his life. Since adopting a plant-based diet with regular exercise, Greg has gone on to complete multiple Ironman triathlons, as well as an Ultraman triathlon, which consists of a 10K swim, a 421K ride, and an 84K double marathon. Greg recently completed a 14,300 kilometre ride around Australia in 78 days and shares some stories of what it was like. Enjoy the interview. Greg McDermott, welcome to the Born to Kick Arse podcast.
Hi, Matt. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good, thanks.
That's
now,
right.
you've recently come back from a massive ride. How's the chafing? Has it sort of healed up?
You didn't waste any time ripping into that one. It's been good, actually. I had some really good advice from a couple of mates who have done some similar things in the past, and the two tips they gave me were wear 2 pairs of Nicks every day, which I did from day one, and that was absolutely amazing. And the second one was when you think you've put enough chamois cream on, double it.
That's a good tip.
So that was 2 really good tips. And then and my coach Tim down in Melbourne was big on hygiene every afternoon. So as soon as I got off the bike, it was a shower, icicle, moisturizer. I've never put moisturizer on any part of my body before, but that was something that definitely kept the saddle sores away, and we never had an issue. There was a couple of days where when we were up north, when the humidity really kicked in, that obviously it was like you've been in a shower for 12 hours, but luckily we got through it unscathed.
Yeah. Now, we'll definitely get into that more, this massive ride that you've recently finished. But before we do, have you always been like an incredible athlete, like your whole life? Have you sort of since your childhood or through to sort of late teens, were you always like an athlete type thing, or?
Yeah, so I've sort of had. I think if I was a cat, I'm probably onto my third life now. My first life in regards to sporting stuff, I played in the old National Soccer League here back in 1998, 99, and through an injury, broke my ankle and went through some bad times there mentally and a bit of depression and stuff. And I started cycling and swimming, and found triathlon. And then I did a little bit of it back in the early 2000s, and then I went off working and pursuing a career and moving states and doing all that sort of stuff. And then my second life probably kicked in, and that was an overweight, depressed binge drinker that gambled too much and wasn't really living a life of purpose in living in Melbourne and then back into Sydney again as well. And then, come January 2013, it was time to make a change. And I did it pretty dramatically. I was 110 kilos and decided one day at a mate's wedding that I'd had enough of that life and I needed to start living a life of purpose and passion and following some of my goals and dreams that I'd always spoken about but never acted upon. So I lost 30 kilos in 3.5 months, and to this date, that's been the biggest, most profound decision I've ever made in my life. Yeah.
So pretty much up until that point, your diet, was it just your normal standard? You hear the acronym SAD, Standard Australian Diet or Standard American Diet. Was that sort of pretty much what you were eating? You know, like just Maccas every now and then and kebabs?
Mate, when I was definitely towards the end, when I was 110 kilos, it wasn't just now and then, it was every day. I was a real estate agent. So living a life, burning the candle at both ends and in the middle as well. So a diet that was really high in carbohydrates, including alcohol, a total lack of exercise. You know, I'd probably pretend if I went to the gym twice a week, that'd mean I went once or maybe nonce. And it was just a life where I would get on the circle. So on a Friday night, I'd catch up with the boys at the pub and watch the footy and have half a skin full of beer and eat the kebabs and the pizzas and all that sort of stuff. And then Saturday morning, I'd be off working all day. So I'd grab half a dozen donuts and a coffee on the way through to work. And, you know, just I was on this sugar roller coaster, and then back on the drink on Saturday night, and God knows what I'd eat then. Half the time I went out, I could honestly say I don't even remember. So it was just a really, really bad circle of the three things, you know, bad headspace, definitely, a terrible diet and drinking far too much alcohol, and obviously the third thing, not exercising at all. So
do you think were you sort of just a big drinker, or were you beyond that and like an actual alcoholic?
I wouldn't say I was an alcoholic, but I'd probably say, if this is a term, a binge drinking alcoholic. So I wouldn't drink during the week. I wouldn't probably have a beer Monday to Thursday, but come Friday, I'd have, you know, depending what was on, 10 to 15 schooners of beer on a Friday night. And then usually, you know, around that, I was late 20s, just coming into 30. So there was a wedding or a 30th or a christening, or, you know, there was some sort of event on most Saturdays. So I'd be the guy that would be the last one at the party, the fat fun guy, my mates used to call me. And then after the party finished, I'd either find someone to go out with, or I'd end up out by myself and find another crew in the city or whatever it may be. So definitely, I mean, I didn't wake up every morning, you know, needing a vodka to get out of bed, but I definitely used the alcohol as my crutch when I was out socially and engaging with people.
So you mentioned 2013, you had like a bit of a light bulb moment where you sort of realised that the path that you're on with heaps of alcohol, diets just off the rails, no exercise. Tell us about that sort of light bulb moment back then.
Yeah, sure. So it was the 5th of January 2013, and I was in the wedding party for my best mate's wedding, and I went to put the vest on, you know, as the guys are all at his place or whatever it was, and I went to put the vest on to wear to the wedding, and it wouldn't fit, and I thought I had the wrong one. So I asked the boys, they're like, oh no, it's definitely yours. It fitted 6 weeks before when I got the fitting done, but obviously I put on more weight over Christmas and had a really good time on the drink. So the vest didn't fit, and throughout the whole day, the pride was into me. We still joke about it now, about me doing the vest up for the photos. And I literally couldn't do it up. And there is some photos that it's done up and it just looks absolutely horrendous. And I remember distinctly making the decision, and I said it to the boys that day. I said, this is it. You know, I'm definitely going to have a few drinks and a good time tonight with everyone, but after that, that's it. Yeah. And they sort of all laughed at me because they'd heard it. These are my best mates. They'd heard it all before, you know, every year it'd be, oh yeah, I'm going to lose some weight. And, you know, this was going on for 3-4 years at that stage. Yeah. Anyway, the next day I left the wedding early that night. You know, I didn't go out after anything. And the next day we're at my mate's place having a couple of drinks, and he said to me, are you serious about last night? And I said, yeah, I am 100%. And he said, well, we'll have a drink now, and as of today, this is the groom, he said, I'm not having a drink for 9 months. And I said, good, I won't either. So we shook hands and had a little bit of a bet. I'm pretty competitive. So that sort of tied me in straight away. And I did have some personal training that was given to me as a Christmas gift. So I decided on the 8th of January, only 3 days or 2 days later after then, to start the PT. And I went into the studio. I'd never sort of done personal training. You know, I had been fit and healthy, but I was always doing outdoor stuff. And Steve, my trainer, said to me, what's your goal? And I thought, I'll just throw a number at this guy. That'll get him off my back for a couple of months, and I can pretend that I'm, you know, here to lose weight, and I will, but I won't have to push too hard. And I said 20 kilos, and he said, great. If you listen to everything I tell you to do and you act on it, I'll guarantee you a result. And I said, okay, well, let's do it. So the first thing he did was totally restructure my diet, and that was the biggest thing that was holding me back. And then after I started, you know, the first week was amazing. You know, I dropped 2.5 kilos or whatever it was, and close to that, I'd imagine it was. And I just felt like a new person within a week. And it was, okay, well, I'm not drinking anymore. I had total support at work. I worked for my brother and sister-in-law at the time, so they were great in regards to supporting me with what I was trying to do. And once I got into this cycle of feeling better, sleeping better, you know, no alcohol, you know, I set some things around me that I knew that I couldn't go out on the drink or anything on a weekend, because I'd book in a 5:30 a.m. training session with someone the next morning, and that was my accountability to being in bed by 9 or 10 o'clock and getting up early and going out and enjoying life. And I still remember going out like some mornings at 5 o'clock going, my God, I still remember only 6-8 weeks ago, this was me coming home, and I was now riding my bike past these people in the morning. So it was a pretty profound, quick change. But the thing that my PT got out of me, and I try and encourage this with a lot of people I now work with and talk with, is that he got me to set a goal that I set, and it wasn't for someone else. And yeah, I sort of just said to him, first of all, it was, you know, I'll lose 20 kilos, and that was a throwaway. But I did tell him in a conversation after that I had a goal of doing a triathlon by March. And he said, yeah, no worries. And that was a genuine goal, which we did. And then it sort of, it went, instead of going down the spiral or down the stairs, my whole life started going up the stairs or up the spiral in probably a quicker rate than what it went down, which was amazing.
With your diet, you mentioned your personal trainer sort of got you on a better path with your diet, for example. What sort of changes did you make with your diet, you know, in conjunction with the exercise and the training you were doing? What choices did you make in regards to your diet that really had a big impact around that time?
Yeah, sure. So obviously the first thing, as I said before, was get rid of the alcohol. That was my biggest handbrake. And then secondly, I was lucky enough to the personal training business that I trained with is called Vision Personal Training, and they have a really big focus on diet. And their whole motto is eat better, move more. And that's honestly as simple as it is. So the eating better meant that definitely I dropped the carbohydrate intake right down. I set it. This wasn't their rule, but I set this rule myself, where I wouldn't eat anything that was processed. So if it came in a packet and had more than 3 ingredients, I wouldn't eat it. And that was just a rule. I can't remember where exactly I picked that up, but it seemed to work for me. So I was working as a real estate agent. So, you know, my breakfast would be at work, and it was really structured for about 3 months. So I'd have 2 to 3, I'd train in the morning. I'd have 2 to 3 Wheat Bix. I changed from, you know, full cream milks to light milks and all. I did all the changes that I needed to do. And then, you know, it was a diet that sort of started heavy with carbohydrate in the morning, and that disappeared to 0 by, you know, afternoon to night. And the protein intake started low and went to high. And they sort of crossed in the middle, and a little bit of fat through the middle through each meal, whether that be, you know, some avocado or nuts or olive oil or, you know, all these natural things that I started to eat. And then, you know, so the biggest challenge that I faced was all these social outings that I was then going to And people listening will attest to this. It's very difficult when you go to weddings and birthday parties and whatever public function you sort of go to, business and networking events and whatever. That was a big challenge for me. And I remember the first thing I went to was a family member's birthday at a steakhouse of all places. And I still remember I went in and I was very specific with what I ordered. So I ordered a piece of meat and I ordered some green veggies and I drank mineral water. And I got to the end of it and I was like, that wasn't actually that hard. You can always find an option, and that's becoming easier for people as well, which is great. So if you can just sort of work out what your intake of food should be and try and stick to that. The other trick is to definitely eat before you go to an event. I found as a really good tip. And it just sort of, once my head got around the fact that I was going to change my life, it just sort of happened. And I know that sounds like a bit of a throwaway line, but it's, I'm a total believer in that what you think you will be. And I had a vision in my head on the 8th of January when I started the personal training that I was doing, that I was going to do an Ironman. And I just that's it. I'm just going to start, doing visualization around that. And, I wrote that goal out as a 9-page document. And I had, who would be at the finish line and what I would be wearing and what the weather would be like and all these sorts of things so I could visualize what that goal would look like. So if you get that goal right, I think everything else just sort of falls into place as part of the process and the action steps towards it. So
tell us about that 9-page document. Was that something that you sort of did proactively, or was it something that your personal trainer sort of suggested, or tell us about that?
Yeah, I'd actually done some training about 6 years ago it was called the Dynamics of Personal Motivation. And it was a 12-week course that I did. I invested in it myself at the time. And anyway, I went back through these documents that I had from it, and I'm like, hey, I never did this. And I was like, okay, well, at the time I remember investing $5,000 or $6,000 into this course. I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go back and look at it. And part of the goal setting process was to visualize the goal and what it would look like at the end and how you would feel. So there was a whole series of things about, how would you be there, what the weather would be like, would it be day, night, like very specific detail on how this goal would look. And it was all around visualization and believing that you'd already been there and completed it. And it just proved to be a real, I sat down, I started writing this thing, and then 9 pages later, I was like, wow, look at this, and I've still got it at home somewhere. I'll have to dig it out. But when I completed the goal, I went back and looked at this thing. Now, there was a few things that weren't exactly right, but for whatever reason, I had this goal in my head when I decided to do an Ironman, I said, I'm going to do it in 10 hours. Now, for anyone who's ever done an Ironman or any sort of endurance event, you've got so many different factors that go into the day. Now, whether that's diet or weather or, course, terrain, wind, whatever. But when I went back, I ended up doing 12 hours for my first Ironman. And when I went back and read the goal, I was finishing in the dark. So if I was to do 10 hours, that wouldn't have happened. Well, I did 12, I finished in the dark. So it really showed the power, to me, it showed me the power of your mind. And I know, there's lots of studies and lots of research now into the power of anyone's mind. But that's what I really took out of that process. That was a 12-month process. And that's what the number one thing that I took out of it was, and to steal Ironman's motto, anything is possible. And that sort of led me on to, I'm sure we're going to talk about it soon, but that led me on to, the ride and, what's to come next and all those sorts of things as well.
So just with the Ironman, just for listeners, can you tell us the distances on that?
Yeah, so an Ironman triathlon is a 3.8 kilometre swim, a 180 kilometre bike ride, and then just to finish you off is a marathon run leg. So, so pretty extreme, but I've done 3 of those events now, and I definitely have never shown up to an event in my absolute peak condition, which I plan to do next year. There's a bit of redemption for me in Ironman. I want to go back and have a really red hot crack at it. But and it's funny now going into this sort of coaching space where that's someone else's huge goal. Now I've got to take a big giant leap back and say, yes, it is an absolutely huge goal, but I need to, the step I need to take back is I need to meet them where they are. I've sort of not moved on from Ironman, that's not the right term, but to do things that are bigger and longer and and all the logistics around those sorts of events. The belief I've got for my athletes now is that anything is possible. It's not. I don't care where you are today. I don't care about any of your circumstances in the past. We see people do these events with no legs, one leg, whatever, blind people, guys with cerebral palsy. Like, it's just amazing how it is amazing how amazing the human body and the mind is.
Is it, like, I've never done an Ironman, but I've seen sort of stuff on YouTube and just other sort of documentaries and stuff. As you're approaching the finish line, does the guy on the microphone sort of yell out, "Greg McDermott, you're an Ironman"? Is that what they do?
Mate, 100%. And so I'll go back to this goal again. There's a guy, he's called the voice of Ironman, and that's the guy you would have heard on the YouTube. His name's Mike Riley, and he is an absolute guru in the sport. He does the Hawaiian Ironman, and then he chooses 2 or 3 other events around the world every year to commentate and say those, famous words. And I wrote down in this goal that Mike Riley would yell out my name and, Greg McDermott, you are an Ironman and all that stuff. Now, he was with he ended up coming to Melbourne. He was with another guy, an Aussie guy. And so you're sort of 50-50 then as to who's going to do it. And, as the goal said, he said those words. And it's, I'd had a big, as, anyone in endurance sport, you have that little moment to yourself when there's no one around, and you might have a few tears, or I was quite happy in Melbourne that I had sunnies on, even though the sun was going down, because there was a few more than a few tears. But you have that realization that you've done it. So that for me sort of came with about 3 or 4 kilometers to go on the run, because I could see the lights. I could, I knew that it was going to happen. And, for anyone who ever gets that opportunity to run down that famous carpet, it is, an unbelievable experience, and I'll never forget it. I think it's like, it's the first one's always special, but it's not far off. I've done 3 of them now, so it's a really amazing experience every time, where that space is all about you and what you've achieved.
Of the general population, it'd be sort of less than 1% that have completed the full Ironman.
Sure.
Like, after you'd sort of completed your first, second, or even your third Ironman, I'm guessing there was still a desire to continue pushing the boundaries. Like in 2016, Tell us about Ultraman.
Yeah, so a little race popped up in Australia 2 years ago, and I started getting the emails about, seeing it on Facebook or whatever, and this thing called Ultraman. And I was like, what the hell is this thing? This sounds pretty cool. So I checked it out, and 2 guys, Craig Percival and Tony Horton and Craig Percival, met each other in Canada at a race and said, why don't we bring this thing to Australia? So Ultraman's a 3-day triathlon event that consists of day 1's a 10-kilometre ocean swim, followed by a 145-kilometre bike ride. Day 2 is a 275-kilometre bike ride, and the Australians, they found every single hill around Queensland to put us over. And then day 3, you've got a 12-hour cutoff each day. Day 3, you show up and you've got an 84-kilometre double marathon just to finish off. And that event was, I looked at it the year before, and I don't think I was mentally ready. And year 2 was my year. So you've got to go. There's an application process. It's it's a total different event to Ironman in the fact that there's only 40 athletes. The roads aren't closed. There's not as much fanfare and hoo-ha about it, which I really like. And the best part about it is you've got to crew it yourself. So I had my partner April drove the support vehicle for 3 days, and then I had another couple of mates who. One guy came up for a couple of days, and then one of my mates came up and did the whole run day with us. So there's a lot of camaraderie on the course as well with other athletes and other crews. And it's sort of, I think, now I wasn't around when Ironman started, but I believe it's like Ironman was when it started. It was like this family of people going out and achieving growth. So it was really cool, but definitely totally difficult. So and for myself, my body went into shock at the end of day 2. So I had 12 to 13 litres of water or fluid on day 2, and didn't process any of it. Obviously, my kidneys weren't working correctly.
So
and
you
I
consumed 12 litres?
Yeah, of fluid, on day 2. Yeah. And I put on 7.5 kilograms of weight.
Geez, that's pretty full on.
Yeah, so I really... I knew like 1,000 bees had stung my face. That's how I looked. Every single cell in my body was inflamed. And I went out on day 3, obviously knowing I was not in great shape. And I literally walked the entire double marathon, only made the cutoff at halfway by 6 minutes. And I think I have to check this out, but I could be the only person ever to negative split an Ultraman run.
Really?
So,
that's good.
Well, I've never really checked it out, but my body came good, and a lot of mental work. And, I had Craig Percival out there really helped me get through that run. And my own crew with April and Damien really, really, really got me home.
So just you mentioned you put on 7 kilos, or your body sort of gained 7 kilos of weight of water, retaining the water. That's hyponatremia?
Spot on, mate. Yeah.
Yeah, that's potentially fatal.
Yep.
Yeah. So are there actually medics on the course, and do they?
Yeah,
weigh
there
you?
is. Yeah, they. So we had to weigh in and out each day, and I was very closely monitored on day 3. So when we weighed in at the end of day 2, we knew there was a bit of an issue, and then the start of day 3, I was actually worse. So I literally ran for 100 meters and walked for 300 for the first half of the day. So we really monitored it, and then my body started coming good. So we're able to pick the pace up a bit, and it's still, when you look at it, I only did 8-minute Ks average for the entire day. But I was, if you look at the photos throughout that day, you can see my body literally changing shape as the photos were taken. So it was a really big eye opener for my partner April as well. We'd already planned the ride, so she learned a lot about how I would react and what we needed to do. You have to think on your feet a lot in events like that, and you have to. The thing I liked about it the most and learnt the most, that you have to give yourself up to the crew. And they sort of are your eyes, ears, and everything else. All you're there to do is to ride the bike or swim or run. So that was a really big learning for me, because in an Ironman you're sort of out there by yourself, whereas with Ultraman it's a total different experience and a whole different kettle of fish when you've got 2 to 3 people. And without them, you don't race. There's no volunteers on the course. So it was a really amazing experience to share with a few other people as well.
Of those people who have done the Ironman, in terms of the mindset between an Ironman and then stepping up to the Ultraman, tell us about that leap in terms of the mindset and your approach to training and the actual day.
Yeah, sure. So anyone who's done an Ironman is physically capable of doing Ultraman. There's no doubt about it. The cutoffs are very not easy. What's the right word? They're very they're good. You've got 12 hours to complete each day. So the only difference I see in an Ironman to an Ultraman is mindset. For anyone listening out there, the training is where it's at. The race itself is a really fun experience. If you've done the required amount of training. Now, I'd sort of done the right amount of training, but sort of not. So I suffered a lot. But when your coach sets you a training session that includes a 7-hour ride and then a 3-hour run that afternoon, that's pretty heavy. And that's just your normal Saturday, Sunday training session. So to get your mind around that sort of stuff, it just takes time. For me personally, I really feared the swim. And I'm a strong swimmer, but I thought, doing 10 kilometers in the ocean, that's really going to hurt. So to mentally get my head around that, I went and swam that in the pool, which was extremely difficult, and not on a physical side of things, but I remember that day and I stopped at 6Ks just for 20 seconds to have a drink, and a guy who's at the pool quite regularly said, "What are you doing today, mate? 7Ks?" I said, "No, I'm going to do 10. And he said, "Well, you've been in here for 2.5 hours, so you better get moving." And I was like, wow, I've got another hour to go here, or an hour and a half. So it's sort of, you just need to get, and I purposely did it in a pool because I wanted the monotony of it to be able to build my resilience against that. And the swim at Ultraman was a breeze because mentally in the back of my head, I could swim 10 kilometers, and I'd done that in the pool, in some budgie smugglers, and then I get to Ultraman and it's a wetsuit swim, and I've got a paddler next to me with my nutrition, and there's other people around me, and there's a drone above your head, so the whole experience is a whole lot different to the monotony of swimming in the pool. And the bike and run training was very similar to that. It's you go out and you do a 7-hour ride on a Saturday, and then you do the 6-hour ride on the Sunday, and then on the Monday you go and run for 4 hours, and that sort of mimics the race. So I definitely will do Ultraman again at some stage. I'd love to go over to Hawaii and give the world champs a crack. It's by invitation only, so I'll have to I don't know what I have to do to get there, but I'll get there.
Well, I think your resume post Ultraman will definitely get you in the door, which I want to sort of get into. The Ultraman itself is an incredible achievement, and that's pretty much a podcast episode in itself. But that was in 26. When did you finish the Ultraman?
That was May this year, so May 2016. Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about, you've recently done a lap of Australia. You've ridden around Australia. When did this idea pop into your mind? Was it sort of post Ultraman, or were you thinking about attempting this even like way before, like in the past?
Yeah,
when
it was. I thought it was about a year ago, but then I went to I won an award at our local government awards not long ago, and they played a video from the year before, which was, I think, July last year, and I said in these awards, and I put it out there that I'm going to do this ride next year, and that was July last year. But then I looked at this old goals book that I had. I was talking about it before with writing down all this stuff, and I just had I called it at the time in 2007 or 2008 my master dream list, and on that was a ride. I wanted to ride a bike from Perth to Sydney. And I still remember I started researching that. Let's say that was the beginning of last year, so January 2015. And I came across a guy in Queensland named Dave Alley that, inverted commas, held the record for this ride. And I'm like, okay, I'll check this guy out. And, I was looking for Perth to Sydney, and all of a sudden this guy's ridden around Australia. And I was like, well, okay, well, if he did it, this guy's a sergeant in the police force up in Queensland. He's married. He's got 4 kids. He's got a business. If he can do it, I can do it. And from the moment I came home and I told April about, I'd found this guy, and she just said, okay, well, let's do it. We don't have kids yet, so let's get out there and see if we can make it happen. So in effect, it's probably an 18-month process with the goal. So when I went to Ultraman, and part of the reason why I probably, hand on heart, didn't train enough was because I always had the ride in the back of my mind. And 2016 was going to be a huge year with, completing. So I'm one of only 700 or so people now to complete an Ultraman. And then to have this ride as well was a huge undertaking, and something that neither of us have had much experience in. But we just had to get out there and learn on your feet. And we sort of adopted this mindset early that it was about progression, not perfection. So let's take a step towards it every day rather than, look, if we waited for everything to fall into place and be perfect, the ride would have never happened. It's been a really big financial struggle for us to make it happen. It was difficult to do everything. It's sort of not that no one's done it, but we sort of relied on Dave Alley to an extent. But we planned our own route. We planned our own pit stops. We stopped at 19 different locations for official sort of events to try and raise money for the charity. So we sort of made it up as we went. And I sit here shaking my head because nothing dramatic went wrong. And I still can't believe that. We had a couple of busted spokes and a few flat tires, and we got the van bogged one day. But nothing, I didn't crash the bike. I didn't get hit by a car. The car didn't break down. We had amazing weather. I mean, we had, 2 days of solid rain in 78. It was amazing. So, and that comes down to a bit of planning, the time of the year we left and the route that we, chose and all that sort of stuff. So that's where it came from was, from a goal from 7 or 8 years ago, but I sort of manipulated that into something where I thought was possible. And then we set about, finding out, okay, how far is this ride? That was the first question. And it was 14,300 Ks. And I sort of thought, what's achievable for me where I am right now to be able to ride that distance and get up the next day and do it again. And, I thought, 120 or 130 Ks would be sweet, but I wanted to extend myself. So, I'd done 3 Ironmans and I said, well, there's no reason why I can't do 180 Ks a day. I don't have to run. So I can get up and do that every day. And so we literally divided the country on a map. I started in Sydney and I got a box of drawing pins out and I used Google Maps and off we went. I sat at home for about 2.5 months. It took me to plan the route out. And I'd do the first week I would do Sydney to Townsville, and then the next week I'd do, what happens out. We did a lot of research on road conditions and where we should stop and where we shouldn't stop, and how difficult it would be, and what, logistically, what do we need? Do we just need a station wagon? Do we need a van? Do we need a 6-berth camper van? Do we need a caravan? Whatever it may be. So there was a lot of, I'd hate to think of the amount of hours. I wouldn't hate to think. I'd be interested to have an understanding of the amount of hours that we put into planning it opposed to the hours we spent on the road, because I reckon we've spent more time planning it than what we actually did out there.
Well, a lot of people sort of don't realise that with major expeditions like what you've done, just getting to the start line is sort of more than half of the battle. Like all the planning and sort of working out logistics and nutrition and funding and sponsorship and all that sort of stuff. A lot of that's the stuff that no one sees. But,
100%. So that I'm happy to talk about a few of those challenges too, mate, if you want. Yeah. So, and it's all I love watching people do expeditions, and I've got a few mates that have done some seriously epic stuff. I mean, we've spoken about Craig, Luke Taberski, it's just, he was a really good influence for us as well in the planning and the logistics side of things, and putting the belief in me that we could do it. And, he was a great, a great person for me to be able to say, hey, what do you think of this? Or, so some amazing people out there that have done stuff before. And that's the coolest part, is that whatever you want to do, there's always someone that's done something similar, or, so you can always just reach out, and social media is great for that. So we had this plan, first of all, that April's background's in sponsorship and events, and I came from a real estate background, so all sales orientated. And we sort of just said, look, we'll put together a 16-page sponsorship document and we'll just get out there and we'll find a corporate sponsor that'll give us the $50,000 that it'll cost us to do the trip, and off we go. No problems. Well, the hardest part about that is that not many of those companies, A, even wanted to hear from us, or B, if we did get in the door, were in any way interested in what we were doing. So that was a really big eye-opener. We got down the path with one rather large financial group in Australia. I won't mention any names. And in the end, they sort of turned around and they said, look, we actually love what you're doing. We're happy for our staff we'll try and promote it and support it. However, we've just signed a $2.5 million deal with Channel 9, and that's where our advertising budget's gone for the next whatever amount of time. So we sort of went home then, sort of tails between our legs, a bit disappointed. But the best thing I did with the ride is I made myself accountable to it, and I put it out there early and said, we are doing this. And no matter what it was that came up in our way, we're going to come get around it. So I met a couple of girls at a business event that had done crowdfunding. I knew nothing about it, and they sort of told me all about crowdfunding and how it would be really cool for our ride, and that's sort of what we did. So we ran a crowdfunding campaign to literally fund the costs of the ride, and we were very public about the fact that this money wasn't for the charity. It was about getting on the road and making the ride happen. And we ended up with we crowdfunded $26,000, which was amazing. Yeah. And we had 210 supporters that came on board from anywhere from literally $10 right through to $5,000 with a spread of pledges that we had. So that enabled us then we had another 210 people then financially and emotionally invested in the ride. So it was happening. So
just with the crowdfunding, like all these people, all these strangers sort of pledge money and stuff. What sort of happens from your perspective? Is there like a cutoff date, and then once that date sort of passes, from a crowdfunding perspective, does the sort of bank account then open and you've got access to the funds? How does that sort of thing work?
Yeah, so basically you've got a 30 or 60-day window. So you set an end time, basically, when you start your program. So we did a 60-day one. In hindsight, if anyone's out there, do a 30-day one. It'll work just as well. So you basically have a website. So there's one called Kickstarter, which people heard of. We use another one, an Australian model called Possible. So you launch a video and then you start. So basically people make a pledge. So they say, right, if you hit your funding target, I will give you X. And in return, they get a reward. So whether they don't have to, I mean, you don't have to put that on there, but it's always nice to be able to. And we wanted as many people as possible to be involved with the event. So we had everything. Like if you put $50 in, we got some trucker hats made up with Right Around Oz on them. So they were sent out to those people. For example, if you put $200 in, I'm madly going around at the moment, catching up with everyone that put $200 in, because that included a coffee with me post-ride to talk about the ride. And then we had one for some businesses that was $1,000. So you pledge 1,000 and you get me for half a day in your business when we return. So I've already done a couple of those gigs and we've got a few more to come. And then we also threw one in there for a sponsor for the ride, and we had one company, and I'm happy to plug these guys, Vision Personal Training at Porkham Hills, and they came on board, and basically they were then a sponsor of the ride as well. So we're able to promote them on social media and, through all our networks, and I went to a lot of events with their business and still am. We went to their Christmas party the other day. So it was really nice to be able to create an entire community around the ride, as opposed to just getting a check from a company and off we went. So, yeah, those people pledge, and then the date that we hit the funding target, those pledges become payable. So it'll just come off your credit card or whatever it may be. And it was amazing. 95, 96% of the people that made a pledge came through with the money. So it was a really, really nice experience. But the big thing we wanted to be was very open about the fact that money wasn't for any charity. That was to fund the cost of the event. And it was amazing to think that we went to all these corporates and all these companies and all this sort of stuff, but basically through our own network, we had a very limited amount. I reckon 4 people that we never have met would have have pledged money for us. So we used our own network, and people were genuinely interested in like getting on board with the ride and trying to help us make it happen. And we always said, we wanted to do it for a couple of different reasons. So one of them was to raise as much money as we possibly could for an amazing charity called Father Chris Riley's Youth Off the Streets. So that sort of enabled us to do it.
Now, with all the planning and the crowdfunding, had you called out a date? Like, had you sort of in advance said, or what date did you kick off on day one?
Yeah,
what date was that?
3rd of September we started, and we said, so we ran the crowdfunding campaign. We actually ran it through the Ultraman process, which was, in hindsight, a really good thing because I got a little bit of media exposure through that, and I was able to leverage that a little bit as well. And it sort of gave me some more credibility that this thing was going to happen. A lot of people in my network that have known me for years had seen me at, my darkest, deepest point, and now they've seen me complete an Ultraman, so they were keen to get on board for the next event. So we ran it, I think from memory, probably April to June or April, May. Yeah, probably April and May. We ran the crowdfunding, but we'd already set the leaving date as the 3rd of September. So we had everything itinerary locked in. That was all available for people to see. Everything was open and operating on my website and everything as to exactly what the ride was all about. It was just a matter of we needed the money earlier because we needed to book a camper van. That was the biggest thing that could hold us back was to not have a camper van. So we had to, again, we got no help from any of those guys. So it cost us about $16,000 just to hire a camper van to sleep in and travel around in. So
I do want to sort of touch on your partner April with her involvement, and we'll get into that. But can you tell us about day one? So you're at the start line. Was this in Sydney?
It was, yeah, northwest Sydney. Yep.
What were you feeling? Like you're on your bike, and were you sort of going to kick off at a certain time or?
Yeah, so we, April, again, had organised an amazing event to start us off. We had about 50 people there at a cafe up in Dural. So we had an event from 7 till 9 a.m. and at 9 a.m. we were rolling. It was, it was game time. To be honest, am I allowed to swear on this podcast, mate?
Go for it.
I was shitting myself.
Yeah.
And it was it was a weird feeling because I had I had 5 kids from the charity come out from Youth Off the Streets, 5 or 6 to come and ride. And I had 5 or 6 or 8 mates or whatever riding as well. So yes, I was really intimidated. I was scared. We sort of had no idea really what to expect, either of us. But all of a sudden, 9 o'clock hits. April came up to me. I was having a coffee with a mate and she's like, "We got to get going." And I'm like, okay, because she'd already organised another event at Wyong at 12 for lunch. So I was like, okay, well, off we go. And we had another mate of ours who donated his time and his amazing expertise to do a video for us that day as well. So he was, he had people there working, and so we had to get rolling. And the day one was a bit of a blur, to be honest. It sort of we had a pit stop at 90 Ks and we had, a little bit of media stuff and the phone was going and a lot of messages and a lot of stuff on Facebook and the video. And we sort of got to Hexham, which was the end of day one. It was 150 odd kilometres. And we were like, okay, well, what do we do now? You know, well, what do we do? And it's like, well, we better find somewhere quiet to park the van up for the night so we can have a sleep. So we did that, and I woke up, you know, day 2, and I was like, wow, okay, so this is the reality of it. I had a look at the map. April is very particular and a little bit OCD at times. So she had every single day on the map where she'd highlight it. You know, we had a huge map of Australia in the van. I remember that first day, I'll never forget it. I looked at it and I said to her, holy shit, like, this is massive. Like, we've covered like 1/2 of your finger, you know, of where we need to actually go. And I remember she said to me, she goes, you just got to take it one day at a time. And that day was a 200K day straight up the Pacific Highway. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I just get on my bike and, you know, all I've got to do is ride. And that sort of became a really big motto in my own head for the ride, and a question that I reckon I asked myself this 500 times was, can I ride 1 more kilometre? And it was like, the answer to that is always yes. And that sort of is the glue that I had to get me through, you know, and definitely having 210 people financially invested in the ride. I got a charity invested in the ride, and I knew that on the final day I'd have we ended up with 100 people, but all those people that were following us, you know, we have 1,500 followers on Facebook, and those people are as invested in the ride as we are. So, and it was all on me. So there was a lot of pressure.
What sort of crushed your ego more when you sort of try, like, I'm sort of thinking from sort of day 1 or even day 0, you know, before you even kicked off, trying to get your head around the distance versus the time, as in, you know, this is going to be over 14,000 kilometres if you make it worth of riding versus, I'm going to be out there for, how long were you out there? Was it 78?
78, yeah.
Did you sort of weigh, did your mind sort of weigh up the distance versus the time? Did you ever sort of play around with that at all? Or?
Yeah, a little bit. I probably remember day 7 or 8, we'd just gone into Queensland, so we were sort of at Noosa, and I remember thinking, we are on day 8. I've got 70 days to go, and I've looked at the photos from Noosa, and I look terrible. You know, I was very tired, and the first week was probably one of the top 3 hardest weeks, in the fact that I'd never done that sort of distance in a week on my bike ever. And I'd had a lot of events to get around to, and a lot of people to talk to. You know, most of my network's on the East Coast, so everyone wanted to come out and ride for a little bit. Or, you know, I had a couple of guys, which was amazing, come out and do their longest ever ride. But that then put a lot of pressure on me to not only ride myself, but I was helping other people, you know, on their biggest event of their life, which was pretty cool. But when you get to the back end of a day at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, you got to ride at 5 a.m. the next morning, and they don't. That can become pretty difficult as well. But it was definitely that was definitely a moment where I looked at time. But most of the best thing about doing an event like we did was that every single kilometre we rode was closer to home. And I think it's not only our event, that's any event. You know, it's like anything you do in life is like the more I can do today, the less I do tomorrow. And I sort of relied on that a lot. You know, I never had a day off because of the way we scheduled it. We had specific events on specific dates, but what I was able to do was, you know, I'd get to a town at 2:00 in the afternoon in the Northern Territory, let's say, and it's like, okay, well, you're looking around and you can't even see a tree, and it's like, well, why don't we just punch it up the road for another 50 or 60 Ks this afternoon, have a little sleeping in the morning, and then we've got 2 hours or 3 hours less we need to ride tomorrow. So I was able to sort of manipulate the distances a little bit, and that sort of gave me, and this, I don't mean this to sound arrogant whatsoever, but when I got into the van at any stage on that ride, every single day that we went, if it was under 100 kilometres to go, April and I would high-five each other and say, righto, this day's done, let's start thinking about tomorrow. And as arrogant as that sounds, that's the way it sort of played out. It was like some of those hard days up north where it was a 290 kilometre day, 100 Ks to go was good. I'd already done 8 to 10 hours in the saddle, and it was like, okay, well, I've only got 4 to go now. So let's, off we go. So it's go on, mate.
Just with the roads, are you, do you have free access to all the roads? Like, sort of some of the major highways and freeways, are you allowed on them, or do you have to sort of take sort of service roads?
No, so we, fortunately, apart from riding into Brisbane and out of Brisbane and into Perth and out of Perth, you're legally able to ride on all the roads. So we stuck to the number one highway 80% of the time. It was only through the southern end of Western Australia where we wanted to go on smaller roads because we wanted to ride around the coast, so we didn't go on the main highway. But the roads are absolutely fantastic, amazing. So there's I reckon 95% of the entire trip I had a shoulder of 1 metre or more, which was tarred. And then the biggest, I was talking about it now, one of the biggest issues out there, and I was so scared about this when we started, was road trains. And, they're 53 for anyone that's listening. I mean, Australians generally know, but anyone that's listening overseas, it's a 53-metre long truck with up to 4 trailers. And I counted this one day, 74 tyres.
Jeez.
So, yeah, they're pretty intimidating, and they carry all sorts of things from cattle to sheep to coal to petrol to gas, whatever it may be. So the cattle trucks are the worst because they can be up to about 6.5 metres tall and carry God knows what sort of tonnage on those things. So they can really blow you around. So the challenge wasn't so much as the trucks coming from behind me, because we were in fluorescent green. I had really good support from a lot of radio right around the AM stations right around Australia. And so a lot of the truckies dial into them. So a lot of them had an idea that I was out there. It was more so when you had a truck coming towards you and one coming from behind that, you get squeezed off because they can't go to the opposite side of the road, of course. So a few times I bailed into the gravel, but I never had a really major incident. I had a couple that, definitely I could have put my hand out and grabbed. But when you're doing 53 to 60 hours a week of riding and you get one of them a week, you're in pretty good shape. I do my training around Sydney, mate, and I have a lot more issues than that in one day, So, yeah, so it was amazing.
With the actual distance per day, did you have a minimum amount of distance that you were aiming to cover? G'day guys, Matt here. This podcast is a labour of love, and all episodes are researched, scheduled, edited, created and promoted in my spare time. Typically, after an episode has been recorded, it can take another 3 hours of post-production activities to get the final cut. If I'm providing you with value and you wish to support my vision of sharing these inspirational stories to the world, you can do so at borntokickarse.com and click on the Patreon banner. Your support will help to maintain the monthly podcast running costs and enable me to outsource repetitive tasks so I can bring you even more kick-ass episodes. Once again, if you want to support me in producing this podcast, head over to borntokickarse.com and click on the Patreon banner. You can't miss it. And now back to the rest of the show. With the actual distance per day, did you have a minimum amount of distance that you were aiming to cover?
Yeah, not at all. We actually scheduled every single day in on the itinerary. So I knew that the way I did it, so I did all the planning pretty much myself, and then April took over and did the local logistics. So what I purposely did, and with the help of Tim and Craig and No Limits Endurance, is to schedule in 3 harder days and then an easier day. So I might do let's say a 200-kilometre day, then a 220-kilometre day, then a 240-kilometre day, depending on towns. But then the 4th day would be 100 to 130K ride. So and again, not to sound arrogant, but that was sort of a recovery day. So I would start at 6 in the morning, but I'd be done by 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. So you've got, all we were doing was riding. So we had time to get off the bike, get a massage where we could, have a really good sleep, and really power up again for the next day. So we didn't have other guys have done it differently where they've just smashed it for as long as they could, dawn to dusk sort of stuff. But we wanted to see a little bit as well and spread the message that anything is possible and speak to as many people as we possibly could about the charity and why we're out there. And that was a big thing. What everyone says, why are you doing this? So if we weren't able to answer that ourselves, how the hell were we ever going to tell anyone else?
So were you doing much night riding at all, or were you sort of trying to sort of be done and dusted for the day before sort of the sun went down?
Yeah, so my goal was to ride between 5 and 6 a.m. and finish by 1 to 2 p.m. Now, that sort of went out the window a few times, mainly due to wind. So I got stuck in the dark probably 5 nights, only for the fact that, especially in the top end of Australia, you might go, the longest stretch we went was 326 kilometres between towns, or between power, I should say. I wouldn't call it a town, just a roadhouse. So the biggest issue we had, and we sort of knew, but we didn't know, was going to be the heat. And the biggest thing I needed was recovery and sleep. So we had to find air conditioning every night. So we had to get 240-volt power to plug the camper van in so it could have aircon. And when the overnight low's 31 degrees and 80% humidity, and you don't find aircon, you're in big trouble for sleep. So we got stuck once. We had 2 hours sleep, I think, and had to get up in the morning and ride again. So that was a big thing to be able to get to power, and just to ensure that my body was right. And then one night, the first night actually, I got stuck in the dark. I started that morning at 4:30 in the morning. I turned out of Broome, and I'll never forget it. I hit a 30-kilometre-an-hour headwind right in my face.
Really?
And there's nothing out there. There is nothing. The trees only made nothing. The trees are, let's say, they're shrubs. So you're totally exposed all day. So at about 8 p.m., so the sun went down, let's say at 7:30. At about 8 p.m., April drove. There's no cars out. No one drives at night because of the cattle on the road. So apart from road trains. So she drove up beside me and said, it's not safe for you to be out here anymore. I'm like, well, I really want to crack 300 because I'd never ridden over 300 Ks in a day. So let's do that. So she shadowed me in the camper van at, let's say 20 Ks an hour. I would have been going by that stage tops. And I rode to 302 kilometres, and we still had 24 Ks to go to get to the next roadhouse. But we, I think, sensibly pulled the pin that night, drove it into the campground, and then started again the next day. So that was one time. And then we hit an 8-day stretch of wind down the west coast of Australia, which is apparently the windiest place in Australia. I didn't know that before we started. And we had headwind for pretty much 8 days in a row, and I got stuck out in the wind a couple of nights there as well, but definitely not for as long. And the best part, or not the best part, but one of the interesting parts, we had 21 days in a row over 35-degree temps. What's that, over 100 Fahrenheit. And then we had one day that ended up being 44, and the next day I got up and it was 18 degrees. It just sort of, like the click of your fingers, the weather just changed, which was it was unbelievable. And I can't believe I didn't get sick, like a head cold or, the flu. It was amazing. But yeah, so it's just sort of changed. But then we got the headwinds again, but it was a lot cooler temps to ride in. So I went from the biggest day of water intake I had was 16 litres of water. Yeah, and I lost 1.8 kilos that day as well. But then, let's say 3 days later, I was having 4 to 5 litres of water, which is a lot more manageable. So, yeah, it's very extreme and remote in the top end. That's why we went anti-clockwise. We wanted to get that knocked over as quick as we could before the real hot stuff kicked in. And then the second reason we went the way we did was we believe, and this didn't happen for us, but we were supposed to get a 70% chance of getting a tailwind across the Nullarbor. So the Nullarbor was 1,200 Ks. I reckon I had 70 kilometres of that as tailwind. Yeah. So, yeah, it was awful.
Just with the approach, sort of the day-to-day approach, with April, did she sort of drive off X number of kilometres in front of you and then you'd catch up, or how did that sort of logistics play out?
Yeah, so that's a good question, mate, because we definitely didn't have budget for satellite phones. We were going to get a two-way radio, mainly for safety for April in the van, but we never did that either. So, you'd have days where you wouldn't have phone reception, of course. So we had a process involved if either of us needed help. But what we do each day, I get up between, let's say, 3:30 a.m. and 5 a.m., depending on which day it was. I'd get up, breakfast, get ready. I'd get out the door, and she would leave in the camper van between 1.5 and 2 hours later. So she was always behind me. So in that time, she'd clean the van. She'd do God knows how many jobs. Like there was gas bottles to be filled and all sorts of things. And then she'd roll up the road and find me wherever I was. Now, that could be, depending on temperature, winds, terrain, whatever, could be anywhere between 40 kilometres. And I think one day in the first 2.5 hours, I knocked over nearly 100 Ks. And then we'd sort of just get together then. I'd have a break for 10 or 15 minutes, get in the van, have 3 or 4 Vegemite sandwiches, fill the drink bottles up, get a couple more bananas, and we'd work out what the plan was going to be for the day. Now, whether that was, I feel really good today, leave me go for 2 hours more up the road, or I need to see, and on the worst days, especially in the wind, we would catch up every 45 to 50 minutes. And we sort of, that changed every day, every single day of the ride. That changed depending on how I was feeling and if there was towns. So as we got closer to home, we just say, I'll meet you at the next town, or I'll meet you at that town, or whatever it may be. Whereas when you're in the north and definitely across the Nullarbor, there's just nothing there. So it's like, okay, well, let me ride for 45 minutes, and then wherever you find me on the road, pull up beside me, and there's no cars out there, so I'll have a quick chat. And I'd say the three commands, I shouldn't say commands, but the three things were: pull over right now, let me go for 2 more Ks, or I'll see you in 5 Ks. And that sort of gave April a really good indication of how I was feeling as well.
Was this sort of like hand signals, or?
Yes, mate. And she would know, the pointing to stop now was really aggressive. The 5 up the road was like thumbs up, feeling great. And the 2 was like, I'm a bit iffy, so just take it up the road and park somewhere safely. I think she got to read my body language really well when she drove up to me, because sometimes the window would come down and she just knew that we'd need to pull over then and there. Then obviously, go on.
Did she ever do the hand signals to you? Like she'd be driving along going, I've got to pull over in 5 Ks, I'm destroyed.
Yeah.
Was there anything like that?
Not really. She might say this differently, but she had at times she would drive past me. Now I don't, I wouldn't say to do this in any capital city, but sometimes I didn't see a car for my record was an hour and 40 minutes. I never even saw another vehicle. So she'd come rolling up to me. She'd have a GoPro in one hand. Sometimes she'd be driving the van. I mean, we're on straight roads, so it's pretty safe. Driving the van with her knees and taking photos with the SLR, whatever. And then a few times out there as well, we did. I felt like I was some sort of pro cyclist because the roads were so, like, mate, you can ride to the horizon 17 times in a day. It's just so straight and so flat. So she would fill up 4 drink bottles, especially when it was really hot. And she'd roll up to me. I'd ride on the driver's side, right in the middle of the road, and we'd do a handover, and off I just kept riding. It saved me stopping. But I never cheated. I did think about it a few times on holding onto the van and having a roll along, but we never did that. There was no ropes. And the other one my mates asked me was, "Oh, you must have had the cruise control set wrong, because it looks like that day you did 32 k's an hour average." So.
So with like the food and the fluids that you sort of took in on average per day, what sort of food were you consuming? And do you sort of know, have you sort of done any calculations as to how many calories you're burning sort of per day? Have you done?
Yeah. So I'll dive into that a bit. We're actually throughout our lives over the last couple of years. Apple and I went vegetarian about 2 years ago, and then we went to a full plant-based lifestyle in September last year. So, and for anyone listening, that just means we don't eat any meat, any dairy, and any eggs. And so that sort of raised a few challenges for the trip. But we had an amazing sponsor named Temple Nutrition. They're a Brisbane company, actually, that came on board, and they do plant-based sports drinks. So, I used their fuel, which was basically dehydrated fruits and vegetables with a heap of salt and a lot of berries and stuff in their products as well. So my sort of daily intake of calories was probably between 6,000 and 8,000. And that would include, I had another sponsor named Coranda Whole Foods that came on board and gave us enough muesli for a year, and nut bars and things. So, in the morning it'd be like, get up, have a bowl of muesli, usually a banana, and then I'd start my day off on the bike. I'd go through 4 to 6 bananas a day. Again, we didn't get bananas for about 2 weeks because there ain't any, so we just had to work around that. And I'd go through a lot of the Temple Nutrition products. And then basically, as I was able to stop at the van a lot, I would end up going through a half a loaf to a loaf of bread a day. I'm not massive on, just smashing down white bread, obviously, but that was the trick. It was peanut butter sandwiches, Vegemite sandwiches, jam sandwiches, whatever. My taste buds sort of changed a lot. And then on the longer days in the afternoons, I went to a lot of sugar. So I had most days I would have a soft, especially in the top end, I'd have a soft drink. At one stage I got a little bit addicted to Oreo biscuits, salt and vinegar chips, Doritos.
Just calories.
Mate, that's what it was in the end. It's like, just get some numbers in you, because I know we're not big on that in our normal lifestyle, obviously, now, but it's like there was no fresh fruit and vegetables whatsoever up in the north end. There definitely would be if you could stop in the towns, but we're on the freeway. So, it's like we don't April didn't have time to pull in for half an hour to go check out if there was, some fresh fruit and stuff. That's how we sort of did it. And, as soon as I got off the bike every single day, she handed me a protein shake, like a recovery drink. So you'd smash that down. And then, funny one, after about 1 week of the ride, we went out with a friend in Townsville, and I had a beer, and I was like, wow, that was really nice. So pretty much from that day on, I had 1 or 2 beers every single night. Yeah. But I haven't drunk for 3 years, but it wasn't about getting, pissed. It was about, it really relaxed me. I really enjoy a beer, especially when it was so hot.
Did you sort of find the alcohol helped with pain relief at all?
I think a little bit of pain relief, and made me go to sleep. Like, click your fingers, mate. I was asleep every night. So it's definitely something that I've already eradicated from my diet every day. I think I've had a few beers since I got back, but definitely nothing like that. But it was, and it was then after about 3 weeks, I started losing too much weight, and which sounds a bit silly, but, I was calculating it out saying, I'm in week 4, I've lost 6 kilos, you multiply that out over 11 weeks, I'm going to start wasting muscle. That will really affect me on the back end of the ride. So to get the calories in as much as possible, and my coach, Tim, was massive on just make sure he's eating, and then he can eat some more. So that was a really crucial part to ensuring that I didn't get sick and I didn't get injured, which, I didn't. I had a small issue with the left glute. I've still got a sore left shoulder, but I think that's just from holding on to the same handlebars for 78 days straight. But, there was no injury, there was no sickness, there was, a lot of fatigue, obviously. But I was able to get up every morning.
Do you ever hit the wall? Like, I've hit the wall heaps of times running, but do you ever hit the wall while riding? Have you ever done that?
Yeah, I have before, definitely, and that was a nutrition thing, but not on the ride. What happened, we realised really quickly that, to be able to to keep performing day in, day out, I needed to really start focusing on tomorrow with, up to 100, like 3 hours to go. So I was like, okay, well, how do I do that? Well, I got to up my cadence, back my watts off. So I used a power meter the whole time, which was great. And I used a heart rate monitor every day. And as the ride went on, my average heart rate, let's say the first couple of weeks, was at 130 odd for a day. The last 6 weeks of the ride, I was averaging under 110 every day. So it wasn't that big push of exertion. And that's when I said before, it was Ultraman. If I look at the two events, Ultraman was so much physically harder than what this was, because we were always looking for tomorrow. And it's always like, well, I can't put my watts through the roof this afternoon, and there's no Strava segments out there anyway, so it's like, just take it easy, because I need to get up tomorrow. And April would look a little bit further ahead than me, but I only really looked at tomorrow. So I would go, okay, well, say 5:30 this morning, I go, okay, we're going to do 180 today, and then tomorrow's 220. So by 150 Ks, I need to be backed it right off. And cruise the last 30 Ks, take my time, get a heap of calories in, and then start focusing on the next day. So there wasn't that, when you're out, you've done a lot of ultras and stuff. So when you're out, and you hit that wall and you've got to sit down and your body's just shot. I think on the ride, I maybe had that twice, but not to that full extent. But it was when I was in the wind and I physically couldn't get myself walking up the steps of the van. Yeah. But within 5 minutes, I was good again.
Did you sort of find yourself, in terms of the smaller goal setting along the way, were you sort of, in addition to, we need to make it to this town, the next town, but you would have had those sort of minor goals, but did you also have minor goals in terms of the kilometres? So, every sort of 500 kilometres, you've hit 3,000 kilometres, 3,500, 4,000, 4,500. Did you sort of have those goals as well?
Yeah, the 1,000-kilometre markers were huge for us. And if anyone looks at my social media, you'll see, like, April had a whiteboard and we really focused on that together. And it was really cool. Like, one of the best, I broke the ride down into 4 distinct sections as well. So I had myself, Sydney to Darwin was a number 1 goal. Then Darwin down to Perth, the Nullarbor was a goal in itself, and then heading home was the 4th goal. So, but within those goals, so Darwin was the first one, and I've got a really cool picture, like standing at the harbour in Darwin with the, I think from memory it was about 4,000 Ks. And if you think about that as the whole ride, it's like, shit, we've got 10,000 to go. But that was a huge moment for us to be able to say, right, we're at 4,500. So, we did all sorts of funny stuff with the sign. One time we're on the Nullarbor, so April wrote the kilometres across the road in chalk, and, we just tried to have a bit of fun with it as well, and try to get, I had a mate with me when I went through 10,000, I think it was. So, we're at a pub having a beer together and, with the sign and, so yeah, definitely the 1,000
That was
the
sort of the big
1,000
ones.
markers were really big for us, yeah, for sure. And it was, I remember when we hit the 10,000 one, I'm like, wow, I don't think I've ridden that far in 3 years, and I've done it in, probably what would it have been? About 55 days. So that was huge.
Did you sort of come across any other riders on remote sections?
Yeah, mate.
What was that like?
There's a guy out there at the moment still. His name's Chris. He's called the Lone Aussie Rider.
Ah, yeah.
This dude has been going. He'll be a good one for you to chat to if he ever makes it home. He's been going for 6 months.
Yeah.
He had done. I met him just outside of Broome, and he's just made it to Darwin. This guy is in a singlet, a pair of stubbies, thongs, and a bucket hat. So he does have a helmet with him, but he tells me he only puts it on when he goes to capital cities. And he's out there, he's raising awareness for Beyond Blue, and he hit some really tough times. He's on an Apollo mountain bike you can sort of buy at Kmart with a 30-kilogram trailer on the back. And I roll up to him. I was obviously going the opposite direction, and I rolled up to him and a bit of green lycra, 2 water bottles and a banana in my back pocket with my headphones on. And I was like, he's like, where's your crew? I'm like, oh, she'll be coming through in an hour or so, and he's like, mate, so he was amazing. And then on the Nullarbor, I met an Italian guy who he's actually walking from Perth to Sydney. He's 69 years of age and didn't speak much English. But he had walked last year from Russia right across to the west of Europe, like 6,500 miles or something. And sort of like, why are you doing this? You got to see the world and you got to get out there. And it was just really cool to run into the odd person that was a little bit more crazy than you.
There's crazy people everywhere.
And I've said that to a few people. I'm like, mate, you should. Like, I was on the phone to a mate one day. I'm like, mate, I met this guy and he is an absolute nutbag. And he's like, what do you think you are? So it was sort of like there's always someone doing something crazier than you. And that was, we haven't really looked at any more adventures in the next 12 months, mainly due to the fact we need to get some dollars in the bank. But we definitely will. But it sort of just reinforces that thing. This guy was 69 years of age. He's walking across the Nullarbor with a backpack. You can do whatever you want. There's nothing stopping. There shouldn't be anything stopping anyone, and the first one, that I always hear is, oh yeah, money or, all that sort of stuff. And it's like, you just got to find a way around it, because if your why is big enough, you'll get it done.
What roadkill didn't you see? How much roadkill did you see? Was it everything?
Oh, mate. Oh, yeah, everything.
Cows?
A lot of cows in the top end, because none of the properties are fenced, especially through the Kimberley and the Pilbara. So there are, this will put in perspective for people, the properties are 1 million acres, some of them, and their fence line, or they're not a fence line, but their borderline can go for up to 300 kilometres. I met a Dutch guy and he said, oh, that's the size of Holland. And I'm like, oh, wow. So, so a lot of cows, a lot of roos. On the Nullarbor, there was a section there, I reckon I went past 50 every 20 Ks.
All right.
Like,
jeez.
Mate, thousands of them. And they're all, so no one in their right sane mind drives out there at night because there's too much stuff on the road. But the road trains don't stop. So that's where they're all getting knocked over. A few wombats, heaps of birds. I never saw a crow, and I was told that you'll never see a crow because they're too smart for trucks and cars.
Yeah.
And I saw, it's amazing the amount of wildlife that you see out there that, I grew up in Sydney and, I've lived in capital cities. So I had one morning I had about 15 eagles, massive eagles, follow me for about 25 Ks. And I reckon if I fell off my bike, my eyeballs would have been gone very quickly. So they just hovered over me. For anyone out there who's a cyclist, my record for a day was 14 swoops by a magpie.
Oh, geez, that'd be fun.
In one day. So there was, it's just such a remote, one day the biggest day I went without seeing any human whatsoever, even in a car, was an hour and 40 minutes. It's just such a big, big country, and you realise the really cool thing is you realise how minuscule we are in this world. And, if we all sort of disappeared off the face of the earth or out of the galaxy tomorrow, mate, there wouldn't even be a blip. So it's just that was a real humbling sort of thing. And you really notice that when you get outside the van at night and have a look up in the sky. And I have never, ever seen stars like that. It was just, it was bright. Phenomenal. Yeah. Oh, it was amazing. Yeah, absolutely amazing.
Now, Australia is, massive. You would have gone through ups and downs all the time, sort of daily. Was there any sort of point on the trip that really stood out for you in terms of your low point? And do you sort of remember where that was?
Yeah, definitely. Probably the hardest point I had was into the town which is furthest west in Australia, called Carnarvon. I had a really rough stretch of wind coming down into there, and just it wasn't even hour after hour, it was day after day. So I had one day I averaged 18 kilometres an hour for the day. I think we had about a 35 kilometre an hour headwind just all day. And then the next day I got up, and April and I both knew it would be a really rough day again. And she drove up to me after 2 hours, and I'd done 34 kilometres. And I remember sitting, I didn't even get into the van. I just sat on the step and head in hands, and how there was never a point where I said, I've had it. It was just, the question was, how are we going to deal with this? What have we got to do to just get through today, and eventually tomorrow will be better. And, that day it was like I think I might have stopped for half an hour. I did become an expert reading wind maps, which sort of was good and bad. I mean, the bad part about it is you know what's coming. The good part about it is if it's good what's coming, So that was a really, really tough day. And every single time I left that van, I had to look up, and the night before we left, I put some masking tape above the door, and it just said why with a question mark. So I just had to keep looking at that. And, there was two reasons why we did the trip. And, the first one was to educate, motivate, and inspire all Australians that, from 5 years or 0 years of age to death, that you can achieve whatever you want. There's nothing out there that's impossible. And the second reason was we wanted to raise as much money for a charity, Father Chris Riley's Youth Off the Streets, and they support homeless and disengaged youth. And, there's so many kids even tonight, if you're listening to this in the night, that are sleeping out there rough on the street wherever you are in the world. And, they choose to live on the street because it's a better option than home, where mum and dad are affected by drugs and alcohol. There's domestic violence. And so I have a really big belief that all these kids deserve a chance. And the more, I can help one or two of those kids, or 10 or 20 or 100, whatever it is, the better. So I just had to keep thinking about that. And, the why was obviously big enough, because it just meant that I had to, wrestle the bike off the side of the van and walk it to the front. And, one of the big things, I never told April this until about the last week, but I never parked the bike at the back of the van. I always rested it on the side, or mainly I rested it on the front of the van. And that meant that when I left the van, I had to move forward. And that was just such a simple little, psychological thing that I sort of invented myself, that if I wanted to get back on the bike, I had to move forward from where I was. So that was a really big one. And, it was, you get a lot of time to think out there. There's only so many, there's only so many of your podcasts to listen to. But there's, you sort of get this mundane repetition, or you run out of battery, or you can't get reception for a few days, or whatever it may be. So you do a lot of thinking. And, I came up with a really simple thing one day. I sort of started looking to the side, to the left to try ride, and then I looked to the right to try and ride. And I was like, well, you can't keep going forward if you're looking sideways or you're looking backwards. So it's, we're given eyes in the front of our head for a reason. So forget about what's happening either side of you, forget what's happened in the past, and just focus on what's up the road and, what the future is and how successful you can be into your own future, surrounded by, people that you love and people that love you and the goals and the aspirations and the attitude you're going to take forward. So that was a really, really big eye-opener for me.
Yeah. So did you sort of find with those low points that you sort of where did you draw your inspiration from? Did you sort of draw upon, was there anyone in particular or anything in particular that helped sort of pull you forward type thing?
I mean, I've mentioned Craig Percival's name a couple of times, and I was fortunate enough to spend a night with him when he did his 8 Ironmans in 8 days in 8 states earlier in the year. And, I met him in Sydney on day 6 and he said to me, mate, it's great you've come out, but it's going to be a long walk. And, we walked that night for 7.5 hours to do a marathon, to walk 42 Ks. And the shape his body was in, and it was just, he was in a bad way. And it was really cool. I drew on that a lot, to know what he did mentally to overcome that. And he said to me that night, he said, you know what, Greg, it's amazing what your body will do if you just give it a chance. And the amount of times I said that exact phrase to myself when, there was a few days, sure, I had, a couple of small cramps, or, I didn't feel like riding, or you just felt like you weren't in it. And it's like, just give it a chance, give it half an hour, just see how you go. And your body is amazing. It'll come back, and so that was definitely something there. And then the other thing I really drew on, I had 5 or 6 kids from Youth Off the Streets came out and rode with me on day 1. And some of these, or none of those kids owned their bike. They were all given to them. These kids come from all sorts of backgrounds of, again, drugs, alcohol, domestic violence. They've had a lot harder upbringing than me. And that was something I really drew on. That's what I was out there doing. I was trying to inspire these kids to have a crack. And the really cool thing about social media these days is that they can all engage with that. You don't need Channel 9 or Channel 10 to come and follow you every day and all that sort of stuff. You just pop a post up, or April pop a post up, and, you get all this back-end support from people that you might never have met, but send you a message and say, hey, I went out today and bought myself a pair of running shoes, or I entered a triathlon, or I did this because of you. And that was really cool. And then the other really nice thing was, one of the hardest days I had, the 302 kilometer day, I woke up the next morning and a guy who I'd only met once, but I do know another guy that works for him in his business, had donated $5,000 straight to the charity and sent me a message and said, I was going to do this, but what you did last night has really inspired me to do it now. And that really gave me a kick for probably 4 or 5 days, to know that someone's out there putting their hard-earned cash into a charity that, and sure that people might have some additional disposable income, but it's at their discretion where they spend it. And for them to invest that into what I'm trying to do for kids is just mind-blowing. So that was really cool. So we had a few things to draw on, and I often think about that day. I thought about it a lot, on the 5th of January 2013, where, and I look back at it now and I'm like, could I ever have thought that I'd be sitting here now on a bike in the Kimberley in Australia? It's 40 degrees and whatever. I weigh probably 75 to 80 kilos and I'm just out there doing what I want to do. I would have never imagined that life. So that was really cool to draw on that too, and to know that I never want to go back to it.
Would you sort of say that, riding 14,000 or over 14,000 kilometres, pretty much from now onwards for the rest of your life, you've been through the hard yards over, on that ride. Do you sort of think as though any of the struggles that you face from now on, you can easily deal with?
Yeah, I don't know about easily, but I think it gives you more of a skill level to be able to, and more resources to use when times get tough, if that makes sense. So, for example, there's a lot. I sort of see a lot of things that, in inverted commas, could go wrong in people's lives, and I don't see them as a real big thing anymore. It's like you lost your job. It's like, okay, well, just sort it out. It's sort of a lot of things. It puts into perspective a lot of things for you, and that's what the guys at Youth Off the Streets have really instilled in me as well. Is like, we're all worried about a lot of stuff that can happen to us as a inverted commas first world problem. Whereas, let's go back to basics. I just have to ride my bike tomorrow. I go to sleep that night. I'm warm. I'm cold. I'm cool. Whatever it may be. There's a lot more people facing much bigger stuff than me. So yeah, I definitely think that. And I mean, I say that there's a lot bigger stuff that goes on in people's lives. And I mean, we won't touch on it now. We were talking before we started about someone we both know going through some horrible stuff at the moment. So, but you've just got to really draw on what you've had and use that experience to move forward, and really drag out as I said before, the big thing I got is that my eyes are in the front of my head. So if I only ever remember one thing about the ride, and that's to look forward and move forward and encourage others to move forward, I think that'd be, for me, that's a win for the whole ride. Yeah.
So when you approached the finish line, what sort of emotions were you going through? Was it like a mixed set of emotions in terms of, like, you've done it, you've completed it? Was there any sort of because I know a lot of, I guess, ultra runners or people who sort of do endurance sports, there is like a real sort of like a down point, because you've done all the training and all the planning, and you've completed what you've set out to do. And then did you ever experience any of those emotions in terms of, that it's now like coming to the end of a particular chapter of your life?
Yeah, to be honest, mate, I'm probably there right now. It's what are we in back for? About 10 days, and it's I wanted to get back into training about 4 days ago, and I was just absolutely told in no uncertain terms, do not do a thing. I did go out and do the half Ironman in Western Sydney on the weekend, but I only did it as a team and I only swam. But that was really cool to get amongst it again straight away. But I haven't officially penciled in any big goals for next year. However, there's, as I said before, I've got some unfinished business with both Ironman and Ultraman. I think Ultraman's probably definitely off the radar for next year, but I think it's important because I've been to the finish line of an Ironman the first time. I still remember I did a second one 10 weeks later, which sort of kept me on that high. And then after that, I went downhill quick, and seeing some old traits come back, and, not eating as well or whatever it may be. So I think it's really important to set in the next goal, maybe even before you finish the last one or the one you're on. And that might sound a bit, to people that sort of haven't been in that space before, it might sound a bit silly, but it's it definitely can hit you pretty quick when you're, especially on this trip, because the highs were so high, and I'm still waking up at between 5 and 6 in the morning without an alarm, because that's my new normal. 78 days doing the same thing will do that. And then at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm tired every day. So there's definitely a bit of a hangover, if you like, from the ride. But I definitely I'll give myself another week or so, and I'll sit down with my coaches and stuff and really work out what's next. And I'll probably say it now, I'll probably have a real solid crack at Ironman Port Macquarie next year. The advantage that I've got is I'll never be this fit on the bike again. I don't think I'm ever going to be given the opportunity to go and ride for 2.5 months every day. So I really want to cash in on that fitness. So to leave it any longer, I know where I'll go, mate, and it's backwards, to be honest, and mainly in a physical sense, because I think this ride's given us a lot of opportunity. And I say us, it's, myself and April, a lot of opportunity to engage with a lot more people, to get out and talk about it, and to create an income around what we've done and what we've achieved together. So, yeah.
Like if there's a listener out there that's sort of contemplating wanting to do a lap of Australia, is there any sort of main tips that sort of come to mind that you could maybe pass on to someone who's thinking of doing the same thing?
Yeah, mate, the first tip I'll give anyone ever that's ever thinking about doing something that's a multi-day or multi-month sort of thing is just do it. That was sort of our motto. Let's just put it out there and we'll make it happen. Because the hardest thing is, I was contacted by probably 5 or 10 guys and girls like, I've always wanted to do that. And in the end, I was saying, well, why haven't you done it? It's like, why don't you come out for a week now and try and experience some of it with us? Or so I think the biggest tip I would have is to jump in and have a crack and do it. Worry about the detail later. And I think I said it at the start, it's about progression, not perfection. Because if you wait for the perfect time, nothing will ever happen. And I think, at my age, I don't have kids, but a lot of my friends and my family are having children now. And when's the perfect time to have a child? It's never, so you just do it. And you learn on the run and you get the right circle of people around you. And that's probably my second biggest tip is I've got this really firm rule in my life over the last few years that, you're the sum of the 7 people you spend the most time with. And as harsh as it sounds, if your partner or your family aren't as invested as you are in what you're doing, it's going to be a really bloody big struggle to be able to get something big like, what we've just achieved off the ground. So I think you probably need to make the decision whether, your goals and your aspirations are big enough where, you may have to, for want of a better term, jettison some people from your life. And that doesn't have to be a harsh thing. I mean, I've gone, it was a really humbling and amazing experience that on the last day of the ride, we had 60 riders come out, and I had a couple of mates show up that I haven't spoken to for a couple of years. And they came out and they rode and they got really involved with the day, and they were genuinely happy and excited for what we'd achieved. They've been inspired. But these are guys that I know that over the last couple of years, I've tried to disengage from them a little bit because they weren't really driving me towards where I needed to be. So surround yourself with the best quality people you can to achieve what you want to achieve. And if that's, if you want to be the world's best public speaker, well, find the other world's best public speaker and get on their coattails. Or, I was fortunate enough, I tracked down Dave Alley, and, he holds the record for the ride I just did. So he was, part of my team, and, I could give him a call today and, have a chat, but that sort of relationship took time. It wasn't like I sort of just jumped in and said, hey, you need to help me. It was, it's got to be a two-way street. And I think if you can just get the right crew around you that will help you, it's definitely not an event or a process that anyone could do by themselves, except for the guy up in Queensland who's towing his own trailer. But you need to surround yourself with the right team. That'd be my 2 tips. Just do it and surround yourself with a good team.
Well, it's an amazing achievement you've done. Not many people have done it. 14,300 kilometres over 78 days. It's quite impressive. Before we sort of wrap up, whereabouts can people find you online and reach out and say hi and see what you're up to?
Yeah, well, firstly, mate, thanks to you, Matt, for reaching out. I think I was only back for a day, and you're like, "Hey, let's do a podcast." So thanks, mate. It was it's been amazing, and the more people that we can share the word with, the better, for want of a better term. So thank you so much, mate. It's been great. the best place for anyone to find me is at my website, which is www.gregmcdermott.com.au, and you'll find all my contact details on there. I think even my phone number's on there. Feel free to give me a call. I love a chat. And then my Facebook page, just search Greg McDermott, and we do a little bit more fun stuff. And if you like behind the scenes, there's an amazing amount of photos on our Instagram account as well, or my Instagram account, which is Greg McDermott _AU. So you'll be able to find me and contact me there.
Yeah, cool. I'll put those links in the show notes. Before we go, one last question. How many flat tires did you get?
Well, this is, again, we had an amazing sponsor come on board. I had, my bike was supplied by Bianchi, which was probably the nicest road bike I've ever ridden. And I've already rung them and told them I want to buy it from them. And then Schwabel came on board and said, we'll give you all your tires. And I was like, okay, we're going to need a bit of rubber. And they said, oh, we'll send you 10 tires. And I was like, that's not going to be enough. So in the end, I used 5 tires. So they were just worn out. And a couple of them were totally worn out. I had 1 flat tire in 9 weeks of riding. And then when I went into Melbourne, I got 2 from Geelong to Melbourne. It was raining that day. And I got 2 the next day from Melbourne heading north. That was it. Amazing, mate. Yeah, and I did get one on the last day. It was started the last day with a really good friend and my younger brother, and we were joking about the flats and whatever. Sure enough, I got a piece of metal straight through the sidewall of the tyre. So I had one on the last day as well. So six flats over 14,300 Ks. What's that? Probably 2,500 Ks a flat tyre. I'll take that.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's quite amazing.
And I'll give you another interesting stat. Pedal revolutions were 2.16 million for the trip.
Jeez,
so that was a big number. Yeah.
Well, congratulations again. It's an achievement that you got to be proud of. It's incredible. Thanks again for coming onto the podcast. And it's been great listening to your story and getting your perspective on what you've achieved and what you've experienced. It's been great.
Thanks heaps, Matt, and thanks so much for your time, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, thanks again.
You've just been listening to the Born to Kick Arse podcast at borntokickarse.com. If you liked what you heard and want more, please subscribe on iTunes. Give a 5-star rating and a Kick Arse review. This really helps to boost our presence and continues to allow us to introduce you to the most fascinating people on the planet. Welcome aboard, and catch you next time.